I'm now going to talk about moving into season, going into, um, what you call it. I wish I could like probably copy paste this, but I'm not going to worry about it right this second. I'm going to just keep this. Um, you could be playing. Now I'm going to start switching things up. So we know that moving forward, we're going into season two, and that there's going to be some changes. So now the question is, should we, based on our analysis of season one, how can we predict season two to look? What can we do to potentially say, hey, maybe there's going to be some changes, or could there be better things that we could be playing? So here's some of the biggest takeaways. Captain America is interesting because he is going to be getting, on paper, he's getting a nerf. But it is worth noting that next season, he's also getting a team up with Winter Soldier. And Winter Soldier is already in a super strong spot. But the team up with Captain America, giving him an extra 100 HP and a 5% damage bonus, is going to be insane. And I think it's going to make him very, very, very strong. And so, add a row below. Let's make this red. And let's call this. Let's make this red. And let's make this. And we will call this the new OP. And so Captain might actually be a contender for removing Thor from the top spot. The problem is that is somewhat dependent on how often he gets his team up with Bucky, which we're also going to talk about in the future. While it is possible that Captain America will be an incredibly strong character, I actually am going to predict no. And so I'll kind of skip ahead to talk about Thor, since this is the main reason. So Thor next season is actually going to be receiving buffs. And the crazy thing is he's getting 75 extra HP and 50 base movement speed, supposedly. Now, again, I'm relying on these patch notes. Things could change between now and the start of the season two. If they do, obviously that affects my decisions. But for now, using the information that I have ahead of me, this is going to keep Thor as one of the top premier tanks in the game. And if you are not already playing Thor, you should really be looking into playing Thor or learning Thor moving forward. One of the biggest problems, though, is that he will be losing a team up. So he will be losing his team up with Storm and Captain America. This is relevant. And it is kind of a problem because now you're going to be relying for, if you want the Thor team up, to be teamed up with Hela. But I don't think that difference overall is enough to really alter your gameplay. It means that you'll probably lose some games more often because if you don't get the Storm, it is what it is. But I think that realistically speaking, you won't be able to double stack your team ups, which actually could lead to some crazy games, especially if you were a Thor that had a Thor with a Storm and a Hela. Like, that could allow you to single-handedly snowball a whole game. But you having more consistency in your games by having extra HP and extra mobility to be that sticky kind of back dive tank is going to really be a major issue. Because I don't believe, again, if your job is to dive the back line, having extra HP and extra mobility to get to that back line, murder or disrupt the back line, and then quickly get out is only going to get better. So I think we're really going to see Thor or Captain America probably be one of the next premier tanks. Next, we get to the Doctor Strange. I'm going to put Doctor Strange and Magneto kind of in the same conversation. So, Doctor Strange is getting nerfed. And at this point, the change to Doctor Strange might be enough to slowly drop him into viable tier. The best thing you can be playing. Oh, oops. In season 2. So, with that said, why is that? One, Strange had a little too much of everything in the beginning of, especially at season 0. Strange had damage, he had utility, he has one of the most crazy ults in the game. The ability to fly is also just an extra like bonus on top of everything else he's doing. Strange had an incredibly loaded kit and also was doing crazy amounts of damage. Now, as we move forward, they are slowly taking out some of that damage from his kit, which I think was one of the most egregious aspects of Strange. Now, him being a shield tank will always mean he will see play. The question is now, is he good or is he broken? And I think the reality is you can play Strange, feel good about playing Strange, but you are not the same broken carry that you were at season 0. Now, one of the things that is important to recognize is, and this is a major thing, let's see. Let's do this. Add a row above. And now Scarlet Witch is getting buffed. So now that's going to beg a question of, is the Scarlet Witch buffs good enough to justify only playing Strange if your team picks Scarlet Witch? And I think that's a really interesting question to kind of like look at, is how good is Scarlet Witch end up going to be? Now, ultimately, at the end of the day, a lot of tanks are not necessarily always picked for their team ups. You're just going to pick your tank because that's your tank and that's the end of the story. So I think ultimately at the end of the day, the nerfs to Doctor Strange are more important than the fact that he gets a team up with Scarlet Witch, which is a little sad, but I do think it's a good thing overall. The tank pool is fairly limited, so, but I do think that ultimately at the end of the day, Doctor Strange is going to get moved down to viable. Moving down, Hulk is finally going to get a little bit more love. Is it enough to get him out of viable? I think there's an argument for that. I am willing to say that that is probably just enough for him to be strong again. Really, the biggest thing with Hulk right now is he's not really getting anything done at this moment. So he either needs to have more mobility or more damage output. And I don't think giving him more damage is necessarily a solution. I think allowing him to be extra sticky, being better at disrupting the backline, not being able as easy to kite or to peel off is what you want from the Hulk. I think these changes are good changes. I think they will allow him to continue applying pressure more consistently. I think that does eventually move him into strong tier. So then we go down to Magneto, and I forgot I was going to mention him earlier. Magneto's getting a slight nerf to the energy cost of his ultimate. I don't think this is going to be realistically enough. It will probably matter at the lowest tier of play, and maybe in some rare instances in high game, but the change ultimately is not going to affect Magneto's win rate much at all. It'll be a very minor down tick, but I would be surprised if this has more than a 1% change in win rate at any real level. Maybe at the lowest level does it have more than 1%, but I would be shocked. Now, what is worth noting is he is losing the Scarlet Witch team up, but instead he's going to be getting one with Emma Frost. At this time, I'm not going to make any comments on Emma Frost. I'm going to evaluate kind of Magneto in a vacuum. I think that if Magneto is strong enough and Emma Frost is strong enough, Magneto will be continue to see play. And I think even if Emma Frost ends up being underpowered, the current power level of Magneto and what he excels at will continue to stay relevant. He is still going to be a shield tank. He is still going to have amazing defensive potentials. His damage is not getting reduced. His ability to snipe Cloak and Dagger in their ult is still going to exist. Magneto is still going to be a high pick, high priority tank. You should continue picking Magneto. Do not like that nerf is a very inconsequential nerf in the grand scheme of things. Now maybe it ends up being more important than I recognize, but I don't see it. Penny Parker. Penny is really, really, really strange because I do not know if the new change is enough to really make her the new best thing. I genuinely do not. Like, it is a tough decision to make without more context. Just kind of fixing things up here. Is this let me see. And we'll call this potentially new. Let's see. So Penny is going to be a hard evaluation at this time because again, I don't play a lot of tanks. She's already in a really solid spot already, and all this is going to do is giving her extra crit or her Cyberweb cluster a chance to crit, which is like why. That's going to greatly buff her damage potential, increasing her abilities to get kills and find pick opportunities, reducing the movement speed penalty, and in giving her 100 base health is a lot. I think ultimately in the grand scheme of things, she is going to see more play. I just don't know if it's enough to really make her strong. I do believe Hulk will make it to that tier. I just don't see Penny quite reaching there, only because as of right now, the question is, will it pay out for the average player? I do expect that Penny mains will be eating good, but can average players really master Penny at the level for her to really shine in the spotlight? The Ting. This is a nice little nerf. I think the Thing is super strong. Is it enough to really make him not strong? Absolutely not. It's just, again, this is a light little gentle tap to his win rate. Keep him in line. I think that's totally fair and reasonable. The Thing does a lot already, so this nerf is not enough for you to be running to the hills and be like, well, I'm not playing the Thing. If you're already playing the Thing, everything you love about the Thing still exists. Black Widow. Does she finally come out of dumpster fire? I'll be honest, I don't play her. I can't tell you. I can't say what this actually does for her gameplay experience. But on paper, this reads to me as, does this one change give her 10% win rate? Or even 5? No. I don't see how this feels like a quality of life change to maybe buffer 0.5% win rate. This does not scream to me a change that ultimately changes her entire gameplay and like solves her 10% win rate disparity. Again, people who play her will know better. I don't know. I'm going to leave that for them to make the more in-depth analysis, but to me, it just screams this is not enough to make up the massive difference in her problems. Hawkeye got some massive changes, and he definitely, I think, not even like Scarlet Witch, I think he may just straight up be viable now. And the biggest reason is reducing the slow effect while charging the bow. So again, anything that hurts your mobility that gets reduced is a massive gameplay buff. Mobility is king. Any extra mobility a good character gets is important. The other thing is the cost in his ult is a much more significant one than we saw with Magneto. 600 cost reduction, and simultaneously the speed of his bow draw getting a nice little buff as well. I think ultimately the Hawkeye players will get a feel for that, but I think that he is just needing some taps. I think this is a great way. It looks awesome on paper. Maybe I'm overselling it. Again, I'm not a Hawkeye main, nor do I portray myself as a DPS main, but I do see this as being more significant than even Scarlet Witch's buffs. So, Goddess of Death, yes, she's getting some nerfs, or she's getting some nerf to her movement speed, but getting some extra buffs to her damage part of her kit. Is it enough to like really make any drastic change? I don't think so at this point in time. I don't think that she's close enough to the highest, and I think that it's a net balance change. I expect overall her win rate will be largely not drastically affected. It might even go down because of the mobility. Again, mobility usually in other games is an important factor. Is it enough to really make the substantial difference in her placement in the tier list? Probably not. Human Torch. Does this change his placement? No, because he still has the same fundamental problem now as he will once he gets these buffs. The vast majority of players do not understand how Human Torch works, and until that gets resolved, he's going to remain viable but not highly picked. I think this may help guide players into the direction of how you should play Human Torch. But the question is, how long does that community perception take? And then once it's figured out, is it enough to help you win games? I don't see it happening. I think it's important to discuss. I think it's cool and interesting, but I don't really see this being the thing that pushes him over the edge enough that he's just readily accessible to a bunch of players, and then we all become broken Human Torch mains. Iron Man. Reducing the hitbox size. That's relevant. That's cool. That's cool. Gaining 100 bonus health. This is actually nuts to me. I'm not sure if it will elevate him high enough, but I think that it is incredibly strong. I think that is something really worth kind of like accessing, like, hey, does that make a big enough difference? Having an extra bonus health as he's just firing his laser is a relevant situation. I think it's going to give him more opportunities to find kills, punishes him less for looking for those opportunities to get high damage off. It's going to be good and because it's good across the board, I think at the end of the day, we're just going to see a lot more Iron Man getting played. And again, reducing your hitbox means you're dying less, or you're taking, instances where you would have taken damage happen less often. That's always a good thing. I think we will see some Iron Man. I just don't know if it's enough to really offset the difference, because he was, I would just say, just viable. He's now kind of like, okay, are those buffs good? I think they're strong. I just don't know if it's enough. Oh, Iron Fist. So, Iron Fist, they've been constantly making changes to. And none of them have really quite hit. They seem to be a little confused on where Iron Fist should be, because it feels like they want him to be similar to Wolverine as this sort of anti-tank. But he hasn't really found his place as an anti-tank, and every change seems to hurt his ability to kill backliners, which is kind of the one area he was kind of already excelling at. So now with these changes, we're just getting to a point where it's like, are we really accomplishing anything with these changes? And I would say no. Can these changes be good? I'm not sure. I'm not sure if this is enough, because helping him kill tanks does what for me? If it prevents his ability to one-shot, or if it potentially harms his ability to find opportune kills on squishy targets like Luna Snow. At the end of the day, They will all, we'll see. I could definitely be wrong. I'm going to bet on this having a net negative, like just this does nothing. And that at the end of the day, his ability to kill tanks is not elevating him to win games. I'm just not seeing it yet. Mr. Fantastic. I think he's already in a good spot. I think these changes are really strong. Giving him extra bonus health to start off with is always a good thing because he is kind of a pseudo tank. Giving him extra damage is also really crazy. The slow effect. I'm honestly going to go out on a limb and I'm actually going to say, like Hulk, he's going to go from viable to strong. I am willing to kind of bet on that because once you add that and the fact that his ultimate ability is also going to give him that extra HP as well, making it borderline unkillable in it, I think this is super good. I think at the end of the day, this is going to end up being him finding a lot more kills, finding a lot more opportunities to get kills in games, and still fulfill that like tanky bruiser. So we'll wait and see. Moon Knight. Moon Knight. So the problem with Moon Knight is these buffs are really nice. Quality of life on his projectile speed. Gaining bonus health, I think, is a really interesting way of buffing him without really buffing his damage and like his kill potential. Because honestly, I think if you did that, it would almost be toxic again. Speaking of the Moonlight Hook, whatever. That's a nice whatever. And then buffing his ult after the previous nerf is a really big deal because the nerf on his ult was a little too extreme. So now with a better ult, his primary weapon feeling better, and getting bonus health so that he can find those picks and maybe not die when the enemy team tries to counteract it, is it enough? The problem is with Moon Knight is he's got such a long ways to go that I don't know if this really elevates him enough to put him in the like, hey, you should be playing like Moon Knight is a consistently viable pick. I can see a world where he goes from like 44% win rate to 47% win rate consistently. And I think if Moon Knight's 47% win rate consistently, I would be somewhat like, yeah, maybe he should be better, but I don't think it's a bad thing for him to kind of sit at a consistently lower win rate, considering the way that his kit works. Him being a little bit more consistent, a little bit more player friendly. Saying, hey, if you want to play this character and maximize it, great. You can only maximize it so far, and even if you do, it may not be the best thing you could play, but you have a viable champion that's not auto-losing you a game. That's probably a fair place to be at. I just don't think this is enough to really... I think the buffs are good. I just don't know if it's enough to make him into that viable tier. I think Scarlet Witch is a better contender for viable than Moon Knight is. Because even with Scarlet Witch, they're basically resolving part of her biggest problem, which is that she just doesn't do enough damage right now. And remove cast from 68. So giving her higher damage output is a great thing. Giving her the ability to do more damage is a great thing. And then her team up with Strange is incredibly good. I think because tanks are so few, the odds of you getting a Doctor Strange in your game is much more of a reasonable ask for your team up. So you're going to find more opportunities to get that team up. Now, again, we already knew that like she already had a team up with Magneto, and that didn't really help her win rate, even though Magneto was one of the most picked tanks in the game. Is that going to remain true even if Doctor Strange remains one of the, like, somehow ends up a high pick rate tank? That's a good question. I don't know. I think you're more likely to find your deal. In an ironic way, she's not going to find her team up as often, but is that team up good enough? Right now, as it currently stands, it looks like a high damage team up. And with tanks being so limited, the odds of you getting a Doctor Strange is a good, reasonable ask. And with Doctor Strange being viable, you're not throwing your game by picking Strange. It's just, together, is this going to be one of those situations where by themselves they're both kind of okay picks and together they're really overpowered? That could very well be the case. This could easily become something much more toxic. Star-Lord getting some minor nerfs, mostly to his spaz ability. Is it enough to drop him? I think it'll matter, but I don't think it's enough to really. It will make some difference. I think some Star-Lord mains will definitely feel it. But Star-Lord does a lot of really strong things to begin with. He has a really strong overall kit. I think he'll be in a fine spot. I don't foresee, as long as his team up remains the same, I don't foresee any major changes happening to Star-Lord. Winter Soldier. So Winter Soldier is already in a really interesting spot. So first off, increasing the cooldown on the hook and then hard nerfing his ult combined together is a very interesting combo. I think one of the reasons Bucky is so overpowered in high tier gameplay is that hook can just change games. For the League fans, Blitzcrank Hook OP. And that's basically what Bucky is. Making that cooldown longer is going to drastically impact some of his games. It's going to make missing those opportunities much more painful. In addition to that, we also got to think they're nerfing his ult. Nerfing his ult means that at the lower skill end, there's not going to be as many resets, and at the higher skill end, you might miss opportunities for resets. And any missed opportunity can drastically change the game. With that said, that might just be enough to drop him down a little bit. Now, I don't know if it's enough. He has an incredibly strong kit, but his overall performance is already hurting. And then combine that with the fact that you're now losing infinite ammo with Rocket, which anyone who's ever played Winter Soldier with infinite ammo can tell you that is not a small nerf. That is a pretty sizable nerf. So with this being changed, he might end up being a little bit worse. He may not be quite in that strong tier. I think he'll still be largely better than a lot of these viable characters. But I think this is a better look that he's probably going to be somewhere between a lot of these top tier characters and somewhere between these. Then we have Wolverine. Wolverine will see play. And again, I don't think these changes are going to be enough to really elevate him in any direction. I think this is more of a tap more than anything. I think you'll still play Wolverine. I think the things that make him annoying will still exist. I don't think it'll be enough to harm it too much. And then finally we get to our healers. Adam Warlock might actually, again, potentially fall a tier. Potentially. And the reason I say that is this nerf is significant. 10 extra seconds on Soulbond can be a massive change. And I think what this is going to open up to is if that Soulbond nerf gets changed, characters like Spider-Man, like Black Panther, like Psylocke are going to find more opportunities to kill him. And he's barely surviving in this meta. If the meta changes at all to where it is more diver friendly and he gets hit with that nerf at the same time, this is going to mean Adam Warlock is just going to become victim to all these strong diving champions. Also, the change to his ult, while interesting, I don't think really matters in the grand scheme of things. Now restores 30% of fallen allies max HP. Well, squishy characters are actually going to have less HP than 100 because if you have only 250 base, you're reviving with less than 100 HP. Your tanks will come back with more HP, so maybe your Groot or your thing doesn't die immediately. But I don't know if that's necessarily better. I think it's kind of a weird change that I think helps with some player consistency, but doesn't end up being good in the end. Cloak and Dagger's ult is just a quality of life. I don't think it's enough to really change their placement. Invisible Woman, again, getting a minor nerf, not enough to really change what makes her strong, what makes her valuable. If you're playing Invisible Woman now, you should continue playing Invisible Woman. Loki getting a bit of a nerf. I think the sad reality is what makes him good is going to remain strong, and I don't think, unlike the Adam Warlock change, the 5-second change in regeneration domain is as severe. So yes, he's a little bit more susceptible to dive, but I don't think that it's enough to really warrant any panic just yet. I think 5 seconds versus 10 seconds is a much bigger difference. And the change from 25 to 30 is much smaller than 30 to 40. Mantis getting nerfed, and this is where things get interesting. Because now, here is where the fun begins. With these two getting changed, Mantis getting a little bit less base health is going to be relevant. And Rocket is also going to be getting some really interesting changes. Okay, so if that's the case, why? Why are we a little bit... What the world? They found new ways of getting around me. So, going back to the conversation. So, Mantis isn't getting Q change. She is getting her base health reduced. But her effects of her healing flower and her allied inspiration can stack. This means that if she's stacking healing or buffs on certain characters, this could actually be a really interesting thing. My understanding is that it's only adding up the duration of the stacks, not the actual value of the stack. So if you double hot someone, you're not getting twice the value of the hot. You're only doubling the duration of the hot. But that is still a relatively decent buff. Makes it a little bit easier to play for new players. I think that's a great thing. Also, I think what's more important is allied inspiration can be stacked, meaning that maybe at the beginning of a fight where maybe the healing output, or maybe in the situation where you don't need as much healing output, giving someone 2 stacks of the buff so that they can go out and do a ton of damage is going to be super, super insane. Or if you want to just refresh the buff partial way through because you don't need to put out as much healing, that is a great opportunity and is going to give her more value on her buffs and heals. And I think that could very well keep her in the top. The problem is, as I said, I'm a Rocket Raccoon main and I have to have some bias here. But Rocket's changes are worth talking about. The biggest problem that I see for Rocket is changing that dash is kind of crucial. Because reducing how far it goes and how the length of the cooldown means he's not as slippery, means people are going to find opportunities to kill him more often. It is a little bit sad, but it does mean that he's more susceptible to getting killed, and that's also one of the reasons I think Rocket Raccoon was so valuable as a healer. He just didn't die. And if you're not dead, you're contributing. This is what made Rocket one of the best healers in Season 1 in my eyes, is he mitigated the number of deaths your team had drastically. He can't mitigate your mistakes, but as long as your team wasn't making mistakes, or if they were keeping their mistakes minimal, Rocket was putting out so much safety blanket for the team that you could do what you wanted to do without fear of losing. Now we get to the crazy part. Looking at the healing done. So Rocket's already notorious for being a bit of a heal botter. And I'm kind of curious how this heal plays out. The way that I view Rocket Raccoon is I kind of view him similar to like a druid in World of Warcraft, where he puts a blanket of healing out with a bunch of hots and just relies on the hot healing to keep his team up. With these new changes, now it's almost kind of interesting because every time he puts out a little ball, they get a flat 55 healing and then that blanket. which means that if he's pumping out more of those little orbs, well, okay, now they're getting these massive like bonus health hits. Like they're just getting constantly just getting bombarded with healing. Whereas before, his healing was just providing a continuous blanket that didn't really increase the value of his healing. AKA, spamming more shots did not gain you more value. It just maintained your value. Now, putting more healing gives you much higher potential burst healing, but your blanket is a little bit weaker. How this actually ends up playing out on paper, I'm a little curious, and I'm really more worried about how this works with the 55 health, because my understanding as of right now is each individual sphere is packed with a 55. And if that is the case, then every time you hit the trigger, you're putting just 55 raw healing into someone, and then the blanket on top of that. That's a crazy amount of healing compared to before, where granted they had 20 extra healing per second, but now they're getting an upfront 55 every time. And again, if you were bomb healing your team, that just meant they were always just getting 70 HPS, and that's whatever. Now it's 55 times whatever number of orbs they get, plus 50 health per second. That's a massive calculation difference. And with the orbs being much slower, now you're able to create almost like a stronger blanket because the balls are much more closer together, providing you much more opportunity to, either bomb heal your team or create a blanket that's going to keep your team alive. Then the ultimate change at the end of the day. I already mentioned Rocket's ult was one of the most undervalued ult. And while I am sad to see the damage boost go down, him giving 100 bonus health per second gives him both an offensive and defensive steroid simultaneously. That is insane to me. Giving your team the ability to have this zone where they're constantly getting blanketed and also putting out more damage is going to be a game changer. The only thing I would actually be curious about, ultimately, at the end of the day, is does that benchmark from 40 to 25 prevent certain situations in which you were able to kill certain characters like Luna Snow with their ult combined with other ultimates? That could be a real relevant question, and that could be a problem, but I think ultimately it makes Rocket Raccoon a much better healer to the point where I almost would argue he might be the best thing you could be playing in Season 2. Because he was already so good, and I think these changes elevate them to that level. So we will see once the numbers come out. In regards to everything else, there are some new changes going around. One's worth actually talking about. Namor is getting stronger squids. He is losing his Luna Snow team up, which was consistent. I'm going to go ahead and say this now. I don't know if Hulk is going to be played enough for Namor to get as much value as Luna Snow. Luna Snow gets a lot of pick rate. Hulk doesn't. So unless somehow Hulk is simultaneously much stronger and is picked way more often, ironically, the team up might actually be, in an ironic way, almost worse because you won't get it as often because not as many players are picking Hulk as you would have normally gotten with Luna Snow, where, pragmatically speaking, your healers are going to be willing to play Luna Snow. Unless I was in that lobby, in which case I told them more no, because I'm me like that. Other major changes: Psylocke and Magic losing their link. Psylocke is getting a one with Emma Frost. I don't know if that's enough to really change her placement. Again, it's going to be dependent on the Emma Frost and how often she's picked. We will be seeing a lot of her within the first month. We'll just put it that way. Anything else? Nope. And then the ones that are getting removed isn't enough to actually change your placement. Doctor Strange is losing his Hulk one. I don't think that's enough. Iron Man, or no. Hulk, no. Bruce Banner, Strange, and Namor are still keeping theirs. Namor's getting the addition. I forgot that for some reason. Forget what is. I actually can't remember. Who is Iron Man's team up with now? Question for my future self. So, end of the day, and then Winter Soldier team up with Captain America, I think will make Captain America good. I don't think it's good for Bucky. So, at the end of the day, this is my thoughts and predictions. Again, a way to kind of vent some of my perspective and ideas throughout the season. Thank you all for listening to me ramble and rant and all sorts of nonsense. I appreciate it. So, hopefully, I appreciate everybody for listening and for if you have insights or thoughts and opinions, or please leave comments in the comments section below. This will be posted on YouTube a little bit later, so appreciate everybody again, and I will see y'all next time.